After spending weeks selling his domestic agenda, President Biden is turning his focus to foreign policy today. He will be hosting the leaders of Canada and Mexico at the White House for the first time in 5 years. The talks between the North American nations have been coined the Three Amigos Summit, and will focus on rebuilding trust after years of rocky relations under the Trump administration. Earlier, we spoke to Ed O'Keefe about what the leaders will be discussing at the meeting.
The expression began during the Bush years, because it was George W. Bush, the Texas governor, who had very good relations with the governors of the Mexican states that bordered Texas, who said, we got to start meeting together and holding this summit. And so for several years during the Bush administration, and every few years during the Obama years, they would hold this meeting. This is the first one being held here at the White House, at least in a while. They've usually been held in other cities across North America. And look, host of issues they got to discuss today: immigration, trade, concerns about protectionism, but also COVID-19 and influenza, two big public health concerns for three countries that are pretty interconnected, especially along border states. So this is an opportunity for the president to bring them together in person for the first time during the pandemic. He's seen Trudeau at some other conferences already this year, but not President López Obrador, who will only be making his third visit outside of Mexico since he became president back in 2018. And, you know, it's one of those sort of meetings on a presidential calendar that probably should happen on a fairly regular basis, and it looks as if the Biden administration is going to restore it.
So, as I pointed out, much like Thanksgiving, there can be, awkward topics that you simply have to address. And so I'm wondering, some of them have to do with trade. The president is trying to get the economy in this country healthy again. He's got a Buy America sort of agenda. Do we think that there will be any resolutions in regards to some of these more prickly topics?
Not necessarily resolution, Anne-Marie, but there will be conversation about concerns the Canadians have, for example, with the Buy America provisions that are now in place, especially when it comes to government contracting and with the Build Back Better plan and the bipartisan infrastructure bill as they come into fruition. The Mexicans will have concerns as well with some aspects of energy policy in this country versus what they're trying to do. They're trying to renationalize some of their energy sector down there. There's concerns here in the United States about that and how it could affect the oil industry and the energy industry. Beyond that, they're probably going to have some conversations about immigration and how the three countries can approach this from a regional perspective. As officials here were noting yesterday, the three countries now are taking in the biggest number of immigrants or refugees from across the rest of the Western Hemisphere, which perhaps should be no surprise since they are the three biggest economies. Mexico especially, of course, has stepped up its acceptance of those people, given that there was U.S. policy put in place during the Trump years. But Canada, of course, also remains a big destination as well for many from across this hemisphere and around the world. So expect some conversation about that tricky issue. But notably, Aide said to us yesterday in a call previewing all this that there wasn't going to be a lot of conversation about border security, which will be of concern to the president's critics and probably to a lot of people who live along border states. Especially amid not only the concerns about immigration, but, for example, the issue that was exposed yesterday, that 100,000 Americans died between April of 2020 and April of 2021 from drug overdoses. And there's been a lot of reporting done in the past year about how the influx of illegal fentanyl, which is often mixed in with these overdose deaths, has been coming from Mexico. And so you wonder if there would be any conversation about that, or why not. And if it's not happening today, at what level is it happening, if at all, with the Mexicans to try to address the ongoing flood of illegal drugs into this country?
Let's talk about some domestic issues, Ed. The president was in Detroit yesterday celebrating the recently signed infrastructure law. I want to play a bit of what he had to say.
We risk losing our edge as a nation, and China and the rest of the world are catching up. Well, we're about to turn that around in a big, big way. We're going to be building again. We're going to be moving again.
So, Ed, the White House is continuing to market, if you will, this legislative victory across the country, especially given the president's falling approval rating. How is that sort of is that creating a dent? In other words, are people starting to change their opinion about the president because his poll numbers have suffered of late?
Too soon to say, given that this was only signed on Monday. But obviously that's what they're hoping for here, that not only will support for the legislation sustain itself, because a majority of Americans do support its passage, but that it will help turn around the president, the vice president, and the Democratic Party's fortunes. There's another poll out yet this morning. You see this post-ABC poll from earlier this week that put him at a 41% floor. The White House certainly doesn't want to see it go much farther down than that. But there's a new poll out this morning from Quinnipiac that suggests that Republicans are pulling away from Democrats in the question of who would you rather see control Congress after next year's elections. So Democrats know they've still got about, a year, just under a year, to change voters' minds. And in doing so, one of the things they will be doing is selling the infrastructure bill and the eventual passage of Build Back Better, if that happens, hardcore across the country, whether it's the president, whether it's the vice president going to Ohio tomorrow, whether it's the first lady and the second gentleman or members of the cabinet. They will be out there doing this and doing their best to turn things around.
Can I just say, Emery and Ed, that
right.
the only reason that I was complaining about the Three Amigos moniker is because I love the movie The Three Amigos, and I don't want my comedy movies sullied with politics.
It is a good movie. It is a classic. It is a classic. All right, Ed, thank you very much.
To my two amigos,
no more
have a good day.
sullying or anti-sullying.
Thanks, Ed.